Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Suzio of Geodata Vision.
Welcome to our podcast series addressing everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but were afraid to ask. This is Len Suzio with Geodata Vision. I'm joined today by Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting. Dean, the last few podcasts that have been released have had tremendous download volume. So what exciting topic do you have on tap for our audience today?
Yeah, you're right, Len, and it's nice to see that type of traction with our podcast. But today I thought I'd keep it brief and discuss the guidance that was recently released, and I say recently in the last few months, by the CFPB in September as it relates to Equal Credit Opportunity Act and credit denials in artificial intelligence. So how we deal with credit denials via artificial intelligence systems is really where I'm headed.
Well, that not only sounds interesting, it sounds like it's very timely. And I know a few episodes back, you spoke about AI, artificial intelligence. So this should be of special interest to today's audience.
Yeah, you're correct. And back, I think it was in June of this year, I spoke of AI in banking. But today I'm going to be a little bit more narrowly focused on recent guidance that was issued in certain legal requirements that lenders must adhere to when using artificial intelligence systems. For purposes of, ECOA. This means that creditors cannot simply just use Consumer Financial Protection Bureau sample adverse action forms or model form notices and checklists if they do not reflect the actual reason for the denial of credit or the change in the credit conditions.
Well, that seems to make sense. What with the expansion of advanced algorithms and personal data in credit underwriting?
Yeah, you are correct. And technology marketed as AI is expanding the data that's used for lending decisions and includes a growing list of reasons for adverse action. And as we all know, we talk about model forms all the time and the model form language. And when regulators came out with those model forms, they said that they would offer safe harbor protection from litigation if you use the model form language verbatim, not just that we use the model form. But with the increase in lenders using these complex algorithms, you can see why issues revealing reasons for adverse action are popping up all over the place.
Yeah, I can see why these issues are finding their way to the forefront. I wonder if HMDA data collection will be updated to coincide with the expanded reasons for adverse action. And by the way, as you and I are talking today, the news came out about how Bank of America, I think, was fined $12 million by the CFPB for sloppiness in their HMDA LAR.
Yeah.
So this is really timely, Dean, I think.
I agree, Len. And you know what the other thing is that, there's an underlying message when you start reading down through that order. And it looks like they may be gearing up to perhaps even get them good with fair lending. Because as we know, when you start talking about HMDA data, in the accuracy of HMDA data, if your HMDA data is inaccurate, the most likely they're going to fail you under your fair lending exam because they can't, they can't do an appropriate or an effective data analysis. So I'm glad you brought that up. And
right,
these are just another area. But
yeah,
I suppose we'll provide. I'll provide some additional guidance relative to to this probably in the future on those types of, I'll call them HMDA data issues in fair lending and how that works. But you're spot on, Len. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose we'll see some additional modifications too with the model forms, not just HMDA as we were talking about, but we have the option, as you know, Len. We have that option under HMDA to code those denial reasons. So I think that will have to be modified per se to be consistent. And I also think that the model forms that are put out by the regulators themselves will have to be modified. So we'll see.
Can you expand a little bit? Can Can you expand a little bit on the specifics of the guidance that you
Yeah,
expect?
yeah,
Give
yeah,
the audience your
certainly.
thoughts about that, Dean.
Yeah, no, thank you for keeping my train back on the tracks, because you know how I get somewhat excited over, you bring something up like the Bank of America 100 violation, and all of a sudden I get a little excited. So, but the guidance is not really it's not really extensive, Len, but it referred to the CFPB
Hmm.
circular from May 26 of 22 regarding what we call black box algorithms, in which the director Chopra was
Hmm.
quoted as follows: "Companies are not absolved by their legal responsibilities when they let a black box model making their lending decisions." The same circular warned that compliant adverse action notifications from some models might not be possible, again because of the language that's used, the in the algorithms that are used within these automated solutions. So specifically, the guidance explains that even for action, decisions that are made by those complex algorithms, creditors must provide accurate and specific reasons so that the consumer, again, can discern as to why they were denied credit. In addition to those circulars, the CFPB also issued an advisory opinion that the law requires lenders to provide those adverse action notices to borrowers when changes are made to existing accounts. And that's often forgotten about in a lot of cases. When we're making a change, a negative change specifically, when we're taking adverse action on an existing account, we're also required to provide notification to the consumer. So when you take these circulars in or opinions, they're really not anything new, I guess you could say. But the expansion of the adverse action reasons is certainly growing in attention from the regulators. So again, I would revisit my controls and make sure that if we are using model forms and we are using these artificial intelligence systems for underwriting purposes and making decisions, then we want to make sure that we're using appropriate reasons for doing so.
Dean, in the many podcasts that you and I have recorded and broadcast, I know you almost always make it a habit not only to point out problems, but to give some advice to the audience. Before we conclude today's recording, do you have any additional advice that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yes, and thank you. You always remind me, which is great because, as you know, my hair is getting grayer every day, and I don't. My memory is not quite as long as it used to be. My mother, yeah, my wife always says, measure it by the size of your fingernail. So, that's when she's mad at me, Lynn. But yeah, given the regulatory attention, yeah, given the regulatory attention, I think that's afforded this area, not just because of what we're talking about today, but as we already know, HMDA and fair lending issues. But what I think folks should do: update your ECOA and underwriting risk assessments. So go look at those fair lending risk assessments, and I'm sure embedded within that fair lending risk assessment, you have ECOA, inherent risk and mitigating factors, the same thing. So you want to go in and update those, review your policies, procedures, and include more specific language as needed if you are using those systems. Review your forms, whether you're using model forms or not. It's very important. Not only that you're using the model form language, but also that you identify those opportunities where perhaps you can apply some consistent language across the board if you're using those systems. Ensure that your messages in these three CFPB notices are conveyed to everyone in your company. Underwriting, making sure that in selecting your vendor, that underwrite and arrive at credit decisions or recommendations, that they're viewed, they're vetted, that you've done the appropriate due diligence, and you've looked at also, again, the language that can be used. Have a sit down to figure out exactly how credit decisions will be compliant and substantiated going forward. The September 2023 guidance goes further to explain that it is or isn't acceptable, and it should be used as a conversation starting material for lender discussions with your vendors. So, again, I encourage people to sit down, have that discussion, figure out exactly how credit decisions are communicated to our applicants, making sure that they can be clearly substantiated within the file itself, regardless of whether it's model form language or not. So that's what I have,
Great,
Len.
great advice. Well, that's great advice, Dean. You got, even though by your standards, this is a little bit shorter than normal. It's packed with plenty of good information and always, of course, with good advice and suggestions for our listening audience. And I'm certain that they appreciate that, Dean.
Yeah, well, you're most welcome, Len. And I thoroughly enjoy, and I hope they take this guidance and update controls accordingly. But this is Dean Stockford from M&N Consulting.
And this is Len Suzio from Geodata Vision saying thank you for listening to today's topic. And please, as we always say, let us know of any additional topics you would like to hear in the future.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and Geodata Vision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.